She only wanted to beat Daphne Culpepper at the Carsely Flower Show, but when the orchids fell and the judge did too, Agatha found herself knee-deep in gossip, poison, and petunias. This is Agatha Raisin and the Fatal Flower Show. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. The Cotswold summer had arrived in one of its more duplicitous moods. All blue sky and birdsong by morning, drizzle and midges by tea time. In Carsely, this meant only one thing: flower show season. The bunting had already gone up along the high street, drooping a little from the damp, and the Women's Institute had begun muttering darkly about sponge consistency. But it was among the gardens, those neat squares of English pride, that the true battle lines were drawn. Agatha Raisin stood in her back garden, hands on hips, glaring at a bed of stubborn roses that refused to bloom as vigorously as she thought proper. She had spent a small fortune on fertilizer, and had even, against her better instincts, hired a local gardener to advise her. The man was currently kneeling among the bushes, looking as though he'd been born in a compost heap. "They just need a bit of patience, Mrs. Raisin," he said, his accent pure Gloucestershire soil. "Patience," Agatha repeated grimly. "If patience won prizes, I'd have a mantelpiece full by now." The gardener hid a smile. "They'll be ready for the show, you'll see. Nature can't be rushed." Agatha turned away before admitting he was right. She loathed being reminded that anything, even flowers, might have its own schedule. Her neighbour, Mrs. Bloxby, had told her gently that gardening was meant to be soothing. But Agatha didn't want soothing. She wanted triumph, and ideally, Daphne Culpepper's expression when someone else's name was engraved on the Best in Show cup. Mrs. Culpepper had ruled the Carsely Flower Show for 6 consecutive years. She was one of those well-preserved women who wore pastel twin sets and the air of moral superiority like perfume. When Agatha had first moved to the village, she'd tried to be friendly. Mrs. Culpepper had responded by suggesting Agatha's hydrangeas looked rather city-bought. Since then, relations had cooled to frost. That afternoon, Agatha encountered her nemesis in the high street outside the post office. Daphne Culpepper was clutching a basket of orchids as if they were royal infants. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin," she cooed, "do forgive me. I thought I saw you pruning with gloves the other day. Not quite the thing for roses, is it? They do say you must feel the plant's pulse through your fingertips." Agatha smiled thinly. "And what do they say about people who talk to flowers?" "Only that it helps if one has something intelligent to say," Daphne returned sweetly, and sailed off in a cloud of smugness and Chanel. For several moments, Agatha imagined pushing her into a hedge. Instead, she marched into the Red Lion for something restorative. The pub was full of villagers comparing petunias and plots. Roy Silver, visiting from London in trousers far too bright for rural safety, was perched at the bar sipping a lime and soda. "Darling Aggie," he cried, "you look murderous, which means either your hair appointment went wrong or Mrs. Culpepper has been at it again." "Both," said Agatha darkly, ordering a gin and tonic. Roy leaned close. "Word is Daphne bribed the judge last year. Something about a weekend in Cheltenham and an envelope of donations. Everyone's whispering." Agatha's eyes gleamed. "Are they now?" "Of course. No one would dare say it aloud, except me, obviously." Agatha smiled, feeling a small, guilty thrill. Scandal was her native language. She returned home that evening buzzing with plans. If Daphne Culpepper had cheated, Agatha would find proof. She'd unmask the woman before the entire village, ideally in front of local press. Her gardener, collecting his tools, gave her a wary look. "You'll be careful, won't you, Mrs. Raisin? Folk take these competitions serious round here." "So do I," said Agatha, and meant it. Over the next week, she threw herself into preparation. She experimented with plant feeds, arranged test displays, and rehearsed her victory smile in the mirror. Bill Wong dropped by one afternoon, off-duty and curious. "You've got that look again," he said. "What look?" "The one that comes right before a corpse turns up." Agatha laughed. "And don't be absurd. It's only a flower show." "Exactly my point," said Bill, and departed, shaking his head. By the final evening before the show, the village green had transformed into a little carnival of trestle tables and marquees. Lanterns glowed under the canvas as volunteers arranged displays. Agatha strolled through, pretending not to inspect her competition. Mrs. Culpepper's orchids occupied pride of place near the centre. They were exquisite, delicate petals of pale mauve, each stem supported by discreet silver wire. Agatha hated them instantly. As dusk fell, the crowd thinned, rain whispered on the tenting, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and polish. Agatha lingered a moment, watching the lanterns flicker. Something stirred behind the orchid display, a faint rustle, too deliberate for wind. "Hello?" she called. No answer, only the sound of the marquee flap settling. Shrugging, she turned to leave, telling herself she was imagining things. Yet as she crossed the green, she saw a shadow detach itself from the far end of the tent, a small, hunched figure slipping quickly away into the rain. Agatha hesitated. Curiosity fluttered like a moth inside her, bright and dangerous. But she was tired, and her shoes were not built for pursuit. "Probably some nosy villager checking on their blooms," she muttered, heading home. Behind her, in the quiet marquee, a single orchid trembled on its stem, a droplet of something darker than rain sliding from its leaf. Morning came to Carsely with deceptive serenity, the kind that made one forget how cruelly competitive a village could be when cakes and chrysanthemums were at stake. Sunlight spilled across the green, glinting off the great white marquee that dominated its centre like a crown on a queen who knew her power. Beneath it, the air buzzed with the mingled scents of flowers, polish and ambition. Agatha Raisin arrived at 10 sharp, her best smile lacquered on and her nerves hidden beneath an aggressively floral dress. She carried her entry, a lavish arrangement of hybrid roses, as though bearing a newborn royal. Inside, she caught sight of her reflection in the tea urn and adjusted her hat with a practised hand. The hat was new, of course, chosen for its suggestion of rustic grace. "Aggie," Roy Silver's voice, bright as tinfoil, cut through the morning chatter. He swanned up, already perspiring in his designer linen. "You're radiant, like the Duchess of Dahlia's." "Don't be ridiculous," said Agatha, though she straightened a little. "How did you get here so early?" "Couldn't resist the local drama. Besides, London's exhausting. No one there ever kills over begonias." Agatha sniffed. "Give them time." Bill Wong appeared next, hands in pockets, wearing the benign expression of a man who knew better than to interfere. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. You look armed and dangerous." "You mean prepared," she corrected. "No," said Bill. "I mean armed and dangerous." He nodded toward the small bottle of polish Agatha was tucking discreetly behind a pot. She flushed. "Just a little shine. Everyone does it." "Not quite everyone," murmured Bill, glancing at Mrs. Culpepper's display nearby. There she was, Daphne Culpepper, monarch of the marquee, radiant in her pastel twin set, surrounded by adoring onlookers and her orchids, immaculate as porcelain. She looked up just in time to catch Agatha's gaze and offered a smile that managed to be both sweet and annihilating. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin," she cooed, "how brave of you to compete again. Your roses look very enthusiastic." "And your orchids," said Agatha evenly, "look practically embalmed. Perfect preservation." "It's all in the care," replied Daphne, "and a little faith." "And a little bribery," muttered Roy under his breath. Agatha's lips twitched, though she schooled her face to innocence. The crowd swelled as judging time approached. Cakes were sliced, teas poured, and gossip thickened like clotted cream. The vicar and his wife flitted about nervously, making sure tempers remained at least superficially Christian. The judge, a retired botanist with a fondness for sherry, tottered from table to table, murmuring polite nonsense and taking copious notes. Agatha's heart thudded as he stopped before her roses. He leaned in, sniffed and frowned slightly, perhaps at the faint chemical sheen. She smiled sweetly anyway, murmuring something about modern horticultural techniques. Then he moved on to Mrs. Culpepper, who greeted him as though hosting a royal visit. "My dear, how exquisite," she trilled as he bent over her orchids. "Do try one of my homemade biscuits. Almond, I believe." Agatha's stomach turned. Almonds, the smell of smugness. She retreated to the refreshment table, poured herself tea and tried not to glare. Roy joined her, whispering conspiratorially, "If she wins again, we'll all have to emigrate. Malta, perhaps, somewhere with less horticultural tyranny." Agatha gave a short laugh, but her eyes never left Daphne. The woman was in her element, basking in compliments. Even the vicar seemed entranced, though his wife hovered nearby with tight lips. Then, amid the hum of chatter, came a sound that sliced through everything. A strangled gasp, a teacup crashing to the floor. Agatha's head snapped round. Mrs. Culpepper was standing rigid beside her orchids, one hand at her throat, the other clutching the edge of the table. "Good heavens!" someone cried. The vicar rushed forward. "Daphne, are you—" Before he finished, she collapsed, the table tipping and sending orchids tumbling in a cascade of petals. The scent of almonds seemed suddenly stronger, cloying and wrong. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the Marquis erupted. "It's her nerves," someone insisted. "She always faints when she wins." "Fetch water!" cried another. "Call an ambulance!" shouted the vicar's wife, pale but authoritative. Agatha pushed through the circle forming around the fallen woman. Bill was already kneeling beside her, fingers pressed to the wrist. Agatha saw his face change, the easy patience replaced by grim focus. "Everyone, step back," he said firmly. "Is she—" began Agatha. Her voice caught somewhere between disbelief and a thrill of dreadful fascination. Bill looked up, eyes somber. "I'm afraid she's gone." The words seemed to freeze the tent. Roy's hand flew to his mouth. The judge staggered back, knocking into a tray of scones. Someone began to cry quietly near the door. Agatha stared down at Mrs. Culpepper, who lay amid her scattered orchids like a fallen queen dethroned. The colour had already drained from her face, leaving only the faintest trace of powder and pride. "How?" Agatha managed at last. "Hard to say yet," Bill replied softly. "But it smells like—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "Almonds," finished Agatha. Outside, the church bells began to ring for noon, indifferent as ever to human drama. Later, as the paramedics arrived and the crowd milled in shocked whispers, Agatha stood aside, her tea gone cold in her hand. Roy hovered anxiously beside her. "You're not thinking what I think you're thinking," he murmured. "I'm thinking," said Agatha, "that people don't just drop dead at flower shows. Not without help." "Aggie, leave it to the professionals. This is a murder scene." She gave him a sideways look. "And you think I'm going to stay out of it?" Roy sighed. "I should have brought smelling salts. For me." The Marquis was now a hive of officials and murmured statements. Someone said Mrs. Culpepper had complained earlier of a headache. Another swore she'd been perfectly fine. The vicar's wife, still pale, clutched her husband's arm and muttered about God's mysterious will. Agatha, however, wasn't buying divine intervention. She watched as Bill directed a constable to seal off the area. The orchid table was cordoned with care, each petal treated as evidence. "You'll have to give a statement, Mrs. Raisin," Bill said as he approached. His tone was kind but firm. "Naturally," said Agatha, straightening. "I saw everything." "You always do," he murmured. For a long moment they regarded each other, detective and meddler, both knowing this was only the beginning. As Agatha left the Marquis, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, scattering light over the village green. The bunting fluttered gaily in the breeze, absurdly cheerful in the wake of death. She paused, looking back at the tent where the laughter of the morning had curdled into whispers. "So much for blooming where you're planted," she muttered. And with that small, wry thought, Agatha Raisin stepped into her next case. The following morning dawned with deceptive calm, the sort of Cotswold serenity that might have belonged to any other village green, if not for the bright yellow police tape fluttering across it like bunting at a macabre fete. The Marquis still stood, but its proud canvas drooped under drizzle, and the tables of flowers now looked oddly embarrassed to be on display after the previous day's spectacle. Agatha Raisin stood just outside the cordon, arms folded, umbrella angled with military precision. Her expression was as dark as the clouds overhead. Nothing irritated her more than being upstaged, and death, however tragic, had stolen all attention from her roses. "They're calling it poison," Roy Silver said brightly beside her, holding a takeaway coffee like an urban trophy. "The police think someone slipped it into her drink. Imagine, darling, death by cordial. I knew this place was cutthroat, but not literally." "Keep your voice down," hissed Agatha. "You'll get us thrown off the green." "Oh, they'll forgive me. I'm from London," said Roy with the air of one announcing diplomatic immunity. Bill Wong appeared just then, trudging through the damp grass in his sensible shoes, his expression unreadable. Agatha felt a flicker of warmth and irritation. He always looked so calm, as though nothing surprised him anymore, not even murder among the marigolds. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," he said. And you too, Mr. Silver. You'll have to stand back, please. It's still an active investigation. You can't possibly think one of these sweet villagers did it, said Agatha, trying for innocence and failing. They're more likely to poison someone with gossip than anything stronger. We're keeping an open mind, Bill replied, and before you ask, no, we're not releasing the cause of death officially. But between us, there was cyanide in her cordial. Cyanide? Repeated Roy, delighted. That's practically vintage. So Golden Age. How perfectly Agatha Christie. Agatha gave him a sharp look. You're confusing genres, and lower your voice before someone thinks you've got a packet of it in your handbag. Bill's lips twitched. There'll be interviews over the next few days. The show committee, other competitors, her husband. Mr. Culpepper? Asked Agatha. He looked as though he might cheerfully strangle her himself most days. That's unkind, said Bill mildly. It's true, said Roy. He looked like a man who's been corrected about fertilizer for 20 years straight. Bill sighed. Let's just say we'll be speaking to him soon. And Mrs. Raisin, try not to conduct your own investigation this time. Agatha smiled, all false sweetness. Of course not, Bill. I wouldn't dream of interfering. He gave her a knowing look before walking off toward the marquee. As soon as he was out of earshot, Agatha muttered, Naturally, I'm going to interfere. Obviously, said Roy. What else would you do, Garden? By midday, Carsely had transformed into a rumour factory. The Red Lion's lunchtime crowd buzzed like flies around spilled jam. Everyone had an opinion, and half of them involved theories worthy of melodrama. Agatha and Roy took a table by the window, pretending nonchalance. At the next table, 2 elderly women whispered over shepherd's pie. I heard she'd been blackmailing that young lad who helped her set up, said one. He's vanished now, hasn't he? Ran off, poor soul, said the other. They say he was seen on the Oxford Road last night, running like the devil was behind him. Or in front of him, Agatha murmured. Did you hear that? Roy leaned forward, thrilled. Delicious. A vanishing helper. Every mystery needs one. He probably did it. Too obvious, said Agatha, sipping her wine. If you were going to kill someone, would you hang around to tidy up the exhibits? Depends on the exhibit, said Roy. You're impossible. And you love it, he said, grinning. Agatha pretended not to. They were joined presently by Mrs. Bloxby, her vicar's wife, composure perfectly intact despite the scandal. She slid into the seat opposite Agatha and smiled with gentle concern. My dear, you've been at this pub since morning. You mustn't upset yourself. Upset? I'm fine, said Agatha. Though between you and me, if Daphne Culpepper's ghost tries to haunt me, I shall send her straight back. Still, Mrs. Bloxby said softly, it's a dreadful thing, and gossip only makes it worse. Perhaps we should remember she was someone's wife. Agatha softened a little. I suppose, though I can't help wondering who'd go to the trouble of poisoning her. Over begonias. People kill for less, said Mrs. Bloxby. Hurt pride can be terribly dangerous. Or terribly boring, muttered Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. Just don't let your curiosity get the better of you. You have a kind heart, Agatha, though you do like to disguise it. Agatha blinked, caught off guard by the kindness. Then she coughed and changed the subject. Anyway, I think I'll stop by the Culpeppers this afternoon. Offer condolences, see what the husband has to say. Purely civic-minded, of course. Of course, said Mrs. Bloxby, with a look that suggested she believed not a word. Mr. Culpepper turned out to be a small, neat man with thinning hair and the hollow eyes of someone who'd just discovered how expensive funerals could be. He accepted Agatha's offer of tea, but not sympathy. It's terrible, yes, he said flatly. But she was a difficult woman, Mrs. Raisin. Ambitious, demanding, always needing to win. Must have been exhausting, said Agatha with feeling. He gave her a strange look, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. She'd have hated all this police business. But I'll tell you something. She was afraid lately, kept checking the greenhouse locks, said people were jealous of her success. Do you think someone was threatening her? No idea. But she mentioned that boy, Jamie, her helper, said he'd been sneaking around after hours. Agatha leaned forward. Did she say why? No, but she said if he didn't behave, she'd deal with him, whatever that meant. Agatha thanked him and left, feeling half sympathetic, half intrigued. A frightened Daphne Culpepper was not something she'd have believed in life, but fear made sense now. Someone had certainly meant her harm. That evening, Agatha returned home in a mood of restless satisfaction. She'd learned more in one afternoon than the police probably had all day. She kicked off her shoes, poured a glass of wine, and sank onto the sofa, staring at the neat vase of roses she'd rescued from the show. Poison, she mused aloud. Cyanide in cordial. Too precise for impulse. Whoever did it planned it beautifully. There was a knock at the door. Expecting Roy or Mrs. Bloxby, she crossed the hall and froze. No one stood outside. Only the quiet street, the scent of rain on stone. On the mat lay an envelope, unaddressed. She bent to pick it up, heart thudding, and tore it open. Inside was a single scrap of paper, typed in bold capitals. "You'll be next if you keep digging." For a moment, Agatha simply stared. Then her indignation eclipsed fear. "How dare they," she muttered, "threaten me in my own village?" She poured another glass of wine, sat down, and regarded the note as though it were an impertinent insect. Yet beneath her bravado, a small, cold awareness crept in. She had wanted excitement, and now she had it. Still, she told herself firmly, she wasn't frightened, merely invigorated. "If they think I'll stop now," she said aloud, "they've clearly never met Agatha Raisin." And outside, under the dim glow of the street lamp, the rain began again, soft, persistent, and full of secrets. Minutes later, they reached Mrs. Culpepper's immaculate garden. Even in death, she seemed to have organized the place. The greenhouse loomed at the far end, long panes gleaming wetly under the drizzle, the air inside misted with ghostly condensation. Agatha pushed open the door, expecting to be stopped by some neighbour or policeman, but no one was there. The smell hit her first, damp earth, fertilizer, and something sharper beneath it, like a dentist's drawer. "Cheerful," Roy murmured. "If she's haunting this place, she's definitely wearing gloves." Agatha ignored him and surveyed the rows of potted plants, each labelled in Daphne Culpepper's meticulous hand. Her gaze snagged on a workbench strewn with tools, a half-cleaned sprayer, and a small glass vial bearing a chemical symbol. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up carefully. "Probably plant food," said a voice behind her. Agatha jumped, nearly dropping the vial. A man stood in the doorway. Mid-50s, weathered face, mud-streaked boots. He gave a polite nod. "Name's Trim. I'm the gardener. Been looking after this place since long before Mrs. Culpepper took a fancy to orchids." "Agatha Raisin," she said, regaining composure. "I was just being nosy," he supplied, not unkindly. "Collecting some empty pots. Mrs. Culpepper would have wanted them reused." Mr. Trim chuckled, clearly unconvinced. She wasn't much for sharing, that one. Liked her secrets. "Did she have any that might have got her killed?" Agatha asked lightly. He leaned on his spade, studying her. "You're not police." "No, but I know them." "And you think you're helping?" "Someone has to. Bill Wong's a dear boy, but methodical to a fault." Trim smiled faintly. "Well, I'll tell you this much. The lady had been fiddling about with growth enhancers, she said. Brought in some special stuff from overseas. Bit dodgy, if you ask me. Said it'd make her orchids unbeatable." "Growth enhancers," repeated Agatha thoughtfully. "You mean chemical boosters?" "Could be. Could just as well be poison if mixed wrong. But she didn't like being told that. Told me to mind my trowel and stick to soil." "And did you?" He looked her in the eye. "Of course I did. I've seen enough people bury themselves without help." Agatha frowned at the vial in her hand. "Mind if I borrow this?" "I'd rather you didn't." "Then I'll take a photograph," she said, whipping out her phone. Trim sighed, but made no move to stop her. "You lot are going to stir things that ought to stay buried. Mark my words." "Mr. Trim, things are already stirred," said Agatha. "We're past the custard stage and into full soufflé collapse." He blinked, clearly unaccustomed to metaphors of warfare or pudding, and walked off. Later that afternoon, the gossip storm reached full bloom at the Red Lion. Agatha arrived with the air of one who'd earned the right to lead it. The pub was crowded, villagers trading theories over shepherd's pie, each convinced they'd spotted something suspicious. Agatha caught the tail end of a conversation between two women from the flower show committee. "She told me herself," said one, lowering her voice. "Daphne was going to expose an affair. Someone from the committee carrying on with her rival." "You don't say? Which rival?" "Could be any of them. My money's on that Penrose woman, always fluttering her eyelashes at the menfolk." Agatha leaned in, unable to resist. "Did Mrs. Culpepper name names?" Both women turned, guilty. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, we didn't see you there." "I'm very good at that," said Agatha. "Now, who exactly was being unfaithful?" "We wouldn't know, dear," one of them stammered. "Only what was whispered." "And you thought repeating it would help the investigation?" "We thought it would help the village morale," said the other defensively. Agatha sighed. "Yes, because nothing cheers people like a bit of scandal." Roy arrived just in time to hear that and clapped her on the shoulder. "Aggie, you should bottle your sarcasm. It's stronger than that woman's cordial." "Hush, we're gathering intelligence." "Darling, it's gossip. Same thing when properly filtered." By evening, Agatha's curiosity had evolved into a strategy. If she couldn't pry secrets from the committee in public, she'd lure them in privately. She rang round with invitations phrased to sound spontaneous and socially unthreatening. "Just a little dinner, nothing formal, bring a bottle." "You're throwing a dinner party?" Roy asked, incredulous. "Since when do you cook?" "It's not about the food, it's about information." "Oh, I see. A trap with canapes." "Exactly. And you're not invited. You talk too much." "Rude but accurate," said Roy. By 7, her cottage smelled faintly of something charred, chicken possibly, and a bottle of wine had mysteriously emptied itself during preparations. The table gleamed, candles flickered, and Agatha had even put on lipstick that matched her impatience. Charles Fraith was the first to arrive, looking insufferably relaxed in tweed. "You said casual," he observed, surveying her outfit, a fitted dress that screamed casual in the same way a Rolls-Royce did modest. "Casual for me," said Agatha, pouring him a generous glass. "You're up to something," he said with a grin. "Just dinner, with a side of truth." Mrs. Bloxby arrived next, followed by Miss Penrose, who seemed uncertain why she'd been invited, but too polite to refuse. Bill Wong, harassed but obliging, made up the fourth guest. Conversation began civilly: weather, police progress, the quality of local tea. But under Agatha's orchestration, it drifted artfully toward Mrs. Culpeper. "Terrible loss," said Miss Penrose, twisting her napkin. "We weren't close, of course, but she was respected." "Feared," corrected Agatha. "Well, yes," said Bill dryly. "That too." Charles leaned back. "Any news on this alleged affair she planned to expose?" Miss Penrose flushed scarlet. "Affair? Good heavens, where did you hear that?" "Around," said Agatha smoothly. "It's a small village." "Vicious rumour," Penrose stammered. "No one respectable would—" "Exactly," interrupted Agatha, savouring her discomfort. Mrs. Bloxby gave her a warning glance, but Agatha ignored it, triumphant. "Perhaps the lady doth protest too much," murmured Charles. "Oh, do hush," said Agatha, though she was secretly delighted by his mischief. Dinner ended in uneasy laughter and quick departures. Agatha saw her guests out, satisfied she'd shaken at least one secret loose, though which she couldn't yet tell. She poured herself another glass of wine, kicked off her heels, and was about to congratulate herself when Charles, lingering in the doorway, said casually, "By the way, darling, your roses outside. They're looking frightfully sad." Agatha froze. "What?" "Wilted, as if someone's taken a dislike to them." He gave her a sympathetic smile. "I'd lock your garden gate tonight." Agatha walked to the window after he'd gone. Under the porch light her prized roses drooped, leaves curling like burned paper. She felt an odd mix of anger and unease. "Sabotage," she whispered again. Then, forcing a brittle laugh, she poured another glass. "Let them come for my roses. They'll find the thorns first." Outside, the drizzle thickened to rain, pattering softly against the glass, a secretive sound, as though the village itself were whispering. By mid-morning, Agatha was striding toward the vicarage, her heels clacking on wet stone like pistol shots. The village watched her with discreet fascination, the look reserved for women who refused to stay quietly respectable. The vicar's wife opened the door herself, pale and dignified as ever. Mrs. Raisin, how unexpected. "Murder rarely sends invitations," said Agatha briskly, pushing past her into the hallway. "You knew Mrs. Culpeper well, didn't you?" "We were acquaintances. She was committed to the Horticultural Society." "So committed she made enemies." The vicar's wife stiffened. "That's a dreadful thing to say about the dead." "Truth often is. Did you quarrel with her recently?" "I beg your pardon?" "You were both on the committee. People talk. Something about funds being misused for an orchid showcase." The vicar's wife's composure wavered. "She accused me of spending too freely on refreshments. Hardly a motive for murder. Depends on the refreshments, said Agatha. Poison's cheaper than sherry. Mrs. Raisin, Agatha softened. Look, if you know anything, you might as well tell me. The police will ask eventually. I know only this. Daphne was planning to humiliate someone at the next meeting. She said she'd reveal a secret that would cleanse the soil. And you've no idea whose secret? None, the vicar's wife said too quickly. Agatha filed that away. Then I'll leave you to your prayers. As she turned to go, the vicar's wife added quietly, Be careful, Mrs. Raisin. Some people don't appreciate being weeded out. Next on Agatha's list was Mr. Culpepper. She found him in his front garden, clipping hedges with an intensity that suggested either guilt or hatred of symmetry. Oh, it's you, he said flatly. Don't sound so thrilled, replied Agatha. I'm investigating your wife's death. Thought you might care to help. He wiped his brow. I've already told the police everything. Daphne was difficult, but I didn't kill her. You don't seem particularly bereaved. Grief shows itself differently in everyone, he said, shearing a hedge with savage precision. And after 25 years of being corrected about watering schedules, I suppose I'm numb. You must have known her routines. What did she do in the greenhouse at night? He hesitated. Said she was experimenting with fertilizers. Claimed she'd invented a formula that could double bloom size. I told her she'd poison herself one day. Looks like I was right. So, you think it was an accident? Wouldn't that suit everyone? He dropped the shears and met her gaze. No murderer, no scandal. Just another foolish woman meddling with science she didn't understand. Agatha tilted her head. Or a clever woman who threatened the wrong person. Believe what you like, he said, and turned away. As Agatha left, she noticed something odd. Every plant in his border thrived except the roses, all pruned back harshly, as if he couldn't bear to see them bloom. Miss Penrose was a more delicate case. Agatha found her arranging bouquets in her tiny shop, all soft pastels and wistful smiles. Oh, Mrs. Raisin, she said nervously, you startled me. Good. Keeps the blood moving. I wanted to ask about Mrs. Culpepper. Horrible business. Absolutely dreadful. Indeed. You were on friendly terms. Miss Penrose hesitated, trimming a stem that didn't need trimming. We collaborated occasionally. She bought orchids from me. Wholesale, of course. And did she pay promptly? Eventually. Agatha's tone sharpened. There are rumours you were closer than collaborators. Miss Penrose flushed. That's vile gossip. People here have nothing better to do than twist the truth. Usually it starts from something straight, said Agatha. Perhaps she found out about an affair. I most certainly was not having an affair. With whom, pray? The vicar? Your delivery man? Her husband? You're impossible. Yes, said Agatha cheerfully. It's why I get answers. Miss Penrose turned away, gathering stems with trembling hands. If you must know, Mrs. Culpepper threatened to ruin me. She said I'd copied her arrangements for the regional fair. Can you imagine? Copying orchids. People kill for less, Agatha murmured. Miss Penrose looked horrified. You can't mean... Relax. If you'd done it, you'd have overwatered the body. Miss Penrose stared, unsure whether she was being insulted or comforted. Agatha left before she decided. Back home, Agatha rang Bill Wong. He answered on the third ring, voice weary but affectionate. Mrs. Raisin, please tell me you haven't intimidated half the parish again. Only a quarter. Any news? Preliminary forensics confirm cyanide. High purity, most likely lab grade. Not a garden centre purchase, someone sourced or mislabeled it. So, someone with access to professional stock? Exactly. Or someone rich enough to fake it. We're tracing orders from the past 6 months. And how long will that take? Longer if you keep interfering, Bill said dryly. Then I'll speed you up by finding the culprit myself. Please don't. Too late, she said, and hung up. Moments later, the phone rang again. Roy Silver, sounding triumphant. Aggie, I just read the papers. You're practically famous. Local sleuth in flower show scandal. You must capitalize on this. I beg your pardon? Public sympathy, darling. Play the tragic heroine. Everyone loves a scandal. Wear something black but clingy. I'm investigating a murder, not auditioning for Love Island. Exactly. Serious with a hint of glamour. I'll draft a press release. You'll do no such thing. I'm not feeding the press. Oh, fine, said Roy, wounded. Just don't blame me when some other influencer gets the limelight. Agatha slammed the phone down, half annoyed, half amused. There was comfort in Roy's absurdity. It made the village's darkness feel less close. She stood by the window, watching rain bead on the glass. Her ruined roses shivered in the wind, pitiful and defiant. Rare botanical toxin, she murmured, only available to specialists. Her mind replayed every suspect's garden, every clue. Mrs. Culpepper's experiments, Mr. Culpepper's 2 clean hands, Miss Penrose's perfectly healthy displays. Someone had known exactly what they were doing. By late afternoon of the same day, the clouds began to break, leaving a silver light across the road. Agatha, restless, decided to clear her head with a drive. The Cotswold lanes wound lazily through damp fields, the hedgerows still heavy with rain. Halfway to Evesham, she spotted a roadside cafe, a squat, cheerless place smelling faintly of fried bacon and despair. She might have driven past, but a flash of movement caught her eye. A young man, lanky and anxious-looking, was emerging from the cafe with a rucksack slung over one shoulder. His face was familiar, the runaway helper from the flower show, Jamie Pratt. Agatha braked so sharply a cyclist nearly cursed himself into eternity. She pulled into the gravel car park, heart thumping. "Jamie," she called, stepping out. He turned, startled. For a second, recognition flickered, then fear. Without a word, he bolted across the car park and vanished into the trees beyond. "Oh, wonderful," muttered Agatha. "I inspire confidence everywhere I go." She stared after him, the wind tugging at her coat. Something about the boy's panic chilled her. He knew more than he dared tell, and someone, somewhere, had frightened him into silence. As she climbed back into the car, she muttered, "You can run, Jamie Pratt, but not forever. I've chased worse than you in kitten heels." The drizzle began again, soft and secretive, as she drove home through the fading light. The village ahead, waiting, its gardens and gossip hiding more than anyone dared admit. The morning after Agatha's near collision with Jamie Pratt dawned grey and listless, the kind of Cotswold light that made even the stone cottages look as though they'd been powdered in gloom. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, poking irritably at her breakfast, while Charles Frayth lounged opposite her with the insouciance of a man for whom early hours were purely theoretical. "You're sulking," he observed cheerfully, buttering toast. "I am not sulking," Agatha snapped. "I'm strategizing." "Strategizing involves maps, not marmalade." Agatha glared. "I saw that boy, Charles, the helper who ran away after Mrs. Culpepper's death, Jamie Pratt. He bolted the moment he saw me. No one innocent runs like that unless they owe money, have bodies buried in the garden, or both." Charles sipped his coffee. "And how do you plan to find him? Door to door with a butterfly net?" "I'll find him," she said grimly. "And when I do, he'll talk." Charles gave a lazy grin. "Then allow me to chauffeur you. I've nothing better to do today, unless one counts luncheon." "You never miss an opportunity to make yourself useful and self-satisfied," said Agatha, though she was secretly pleased. By late morning, Charles's Jaguar purred down a winding road toward Evesham, its leather interior smelling faintly of aftershave and entitlement. Agatha sat upright in the passenger seat, scanning every cafe and petrol stop like a bloodhound in pearls. "Remind me again why we're looking in roadside cafes," asked Charles. "Because they're full of guilty people. It's the anonymity, all those sad fry-ups and instant coffees. You can commit a crime in the morning and hide behind a bacon bat by noon." "You have such faith in humanity," said Charles dryly. "It's what keeps me alert." They pulled into a shabby little cafe with a flickering neon sign reading Greasy John's. Inside, the air was thick with frying oil and resignation. Agatha's eyes narrowed. At a back table, a lanky young man hunched over a newspaper, a cap pulled low over his eyes. "That's him," she whispered. "Are you sure?" "Yes. He's got the posture of a guilty conscience." "Or someone with a backache," murmured Charles. But Agatha was already striding across the cafe, heels clicking like accusations. "Jamie Pratt!" she barked. The boy flinched, then froze, caught mid-escape between a ketchup bottle and panic. "Well, what do you want?" "Answers," said Agatha. "Sit down before I make a scene." Charles joined them, settling into the booth with practiced ease. "Do be careful, Mrs. Raisin. The poor lad's turning pale." Jamie looked from one to the other, assessing his odds. "I didn't do nothing wrong, honest. Mrs. Culpepper, she twisted things." "How so?" Agatha demanded. He hesitated, then sighed. She caught me nicking fertilizer. Not the cheap stuff. Imported blend, the kind professionals use. I only took a few bags. I was going to pay her back, but she said she'd report me unless I did her odd jobs. Called it community restitution. So she blackmailed you, said Agatha, leaning forward. She called it mentorship. Charles chuckled. Same thing, different hat. Go on, said Agatha. Jamie rubbed his hands together. She had me in that greenhouse every night, mixing things, polishing pots, all that nonsense. But one night, a few days before she died, she told me not to come round, said she had business. I went anyway, just to see, and I saw someone else in there. Agatha's pulse quickened. Who? Couldn't see the face. It was dark. But it was a woman. Posh, you could tell. She wore pearls and gloves. Gardening gloves, but fancy. Agatha and Charles exchanged a glance. You're certain about that? Positive. I saw the shine when she turned her head toward the lantern light. She was talking to Mrs. Culpepper, arguing more like. I didn't stick around. Figured I'd get blamed for something, as usual. And where have you been since? Agatha asked. Nowhere. Just drifting. Didn't mean to run from you last night, Mrs. Raisin. I thought you were police, or worse, her husband. Mr. Culpepper couldn't frighten a daffodil, Agatha said. You needn't worry about him. What matters is who that woman was. You think it was the killer? Jamie asked nervously. Or someone who knows more than they're admitting, said Agatha. You'll tell the police, won't you? Of course, said Agatha. In due course. Jamie looked doubtful. In due course means never, doesn't it? Charles grinned. You catch on quickly, lad. Back in Carsely, Agatha insisted on stopping by the vicarage. Mrs. Bloxby was in the garden, snipping lavender and radiating serenity like an antidote to everything Agatha wasn't. My dear, you look quite windblown, she said kindly. I've been interrogating a fugitive in a cafe that smelled like regret, said Agatha, and I found out something rather shocking. I hope not too shocking, Mrs. Bloxby murmured. Agatha recounted Jamie's story with relish, while Charles leaned against the fence enjoying the show. A woman wearing pearls, Mrs. Bloxby repeated thoughtfully. That narrows it down to about half the county. You'd be surprised, said Agatha. Most women here wear gilt, not jewellery. Mrs. Bloxby ignored the jab. There's something else you should know. Before the show, Daphne Culpepper mentioned to me, quite out of the blue, that she intended to make an announcement. Something revolutionary, she said. I assumed it was about her orchids. Or her blackmail victims, said Agatha. Perhaps, Mrs. Bloxby said softly, but she seemed genuinely excited, not vindictive. She said it would change the horticultural world forever. Charles raised an eyebrow. A bit ambitious for begonias, surely. It could have been about her fertilizer experiments, Agatha mused. That vial I found in her greenhouse. Maybe she'd discovered something potent. Potent enough to kill her, said Charles. Mrs. Bloxby sighed. Promise me you'll be careful. Curiosity can be a dangerous garden, Agatha. Don't worry, said Agatha. I'm wearing gloves. That evening, Carsely was steeped in drizzle again, the kind that seemed designed to undo all good moods. Agatha returned home exhausted but triumphant, her mind buzzing with new leads. She made herself a drink, flopped into her armchair, and replayed the day in her head. Pearls, gloves, an argument in the greenhouse, Mrs. Culpepper's secret announcement. All of it threaded together somehow, but the pattern still eluded her. She was about to ring Bill Wong when the doorbell sounded. With a sigh, she rose, expecting Charles back with some flippant remark about supper. But the doorstep was empty. Only a wicker basket sat there, glistening with rain. She bent down, curious. Inside was an exquisite arrangement of lilies, pure white, fragrant, and unsettlingly perfect. A small card was tucked between the stems. Agatha plucked it out, frowning as she read the typed message, to the next best in show. For a long moment, she stood very still, the card trembling slightly between her fingers. The lilies smelled beautiful. Someone had misted them with a faint, bitter almond perfume. Oh, for heaven's sake, she muttered. Can't anyone just send flowers without threatening me? She carried the basket to the sink, half tempted to dunk it entirely in water or wine. Instead, she stared at the blooms, graceful, silent, menacing, and felt a prickling unease under her bravado. She had wanted drama, and now it was growing around her, as surely as weeds after rain. Still, Agatha Raisin was not one to wilt. "Fine," she said aloud, setting her jaw. "If someone wants to play florist, they've chosen the wrong woman." Outside, thunder murmured over the hills, not loud, just enough to promise more weather, more trouble, and more mystery to come. A brittle sunlight trembled over Carsely that morning, the kind that promised warmth and delivered glare. Agatha Raisin, still cross about the lilies from the night before, stood at her dressing mirror, jabbing pins into her hair with unnecessary force. Charles, lounging in the doorway, watched with amused caution. "If you stab yourself any harder, you'll need stitches," he observed. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" Agatha shot back. "No, darling. Watching you prepare for battle is entertainment enough." "This isn't battle," she said, powdering her nose. "It's reconnaissance." "Against whom?" "Miss Penrose." Charles raised an eyebrow. The florist with the nervous giggle. "The same. Jamie Pratt saw a woman in pearls and gloves arguing with Mrs. Culpepper the night she died. Miss Penrose wears both, and she's as slippery as an eel in rosewater. Time for a friendly visit." "Ah," said Charles, "the sort of friendly that involves trespassing." "Don't be ridiculous," said Agatha, reaching for her handbag. "Trespassing implies one gets caught." After the greenhouse confirmed someone knew their chemicals, Agatha headed straight for Miss Penrose. Miss Penrose's shop, the Bloom Room, sat prettily on the corner of the high street, its window bursting with carefully arranged innocence, pastel bouquets, lavender sachets, and a chalkboard sign reading "Floral Therapy for the Soul." Agatha found this deeply offensive. She had never trusted anyone who made a living from gentleness. The bell jingled as she entered. Miss Penrose emerged from the back room, neat as a ribbon, wearing cream gloves and, Agatha noted with satisfaction, a string of pearls. "Mrs. Raisin? How lovely. Shopping for sympathy flowers." Agatha forced a smile. "Actually, I was admiring your hydrangeas. Such a delicate colour. Almost suspiciously perfect." "Suspicious." "In the best way," Agatha said quickly. "I was wondering if you might show me your secret." Miss Penrose blinked. "My secret?" "Your methods," said Agatha sweetly. "How you keep them so fresh. My own roses have gone into mourning." "Oh, poor things," said Miss Penrose, fluttering. "It's all about humidity, really. You must regulate it carefully." "Fascinating," said Agatha. "I'd love to see your conservatory set up. Professional curiosity." "Well, splendid," said Agatha, sweeping past her before permission could materialize. The conservatory was immaculate, too immaculate. Rows of glossy leaves gleamed as though individually polished. At one end stood a writing desk with a little leather-bound ledger, the kind people used before computers made honesty optional. "You certainly run a tight ship," said Agatha, scanning the pages as if idly admiring handwriting. Her eyes widened. Names, dozens of them, were listed alongside amounts. Familiar names, Carsely competitors, society members, even Mrs. Culpepper's. Each entry marked design commission, though Agatha suspected a more creative interpretation of the term. She bent closer, trying to commit details to memory, when a voice behind her made her jump. "What are you doing?" Miss Penrose had returned, hands clasped tight. Her smile was polite, her eyes anything but. "Oh," Agatha straightened, pretending to examine a begonia. "Just marvelling at your specimens. This one's practically glowing." "That's because you're standing under the lamp," said Miss Penrose coldly. "Of course," said Agatha, recovering fast. "Light does marvellous things to colour, don't you find?" "Not to honesty," murmured Miss Penrose. Agatha's laugh was brittle. "Dear me, you sound just like Mrs. Culpepper, all moral rectitude and no fun." Miss Penrose's expression flickered. "She was not my friend, if that's what you're implying. She was a bully, but I didn't kill her." "Who said anything about killing?" said Agatha innocently. "You didn't have to," came the reply. For a moment, silence pooled between them, thick, humid, alive. Then Miss Penrose smiled again, too brightly. "Would you like tea?" "Thank you, but I'm cutting down," said Agatha, edging toward the door. "Caffeine makes me suspicious." Outside, she breathed deeply, half from relief, half from triumph. She had her clue: payments, motives, and guilt disguised in floral fragrance. Charles, waiting by the car, raised an eyebrow. "You look like a cat that's found the cream but suspects arsenic." "There's a ledger in there, full of names and bribes. She's been selling floral designs to half the village. No wonder everyone wins prizes. And what's your next step? Confront her? Not yet, said Agatha. First, Bill Wong will confirm the evidence. Do give the man a chance to finish his lunch before you ruin it. Murder doesn't wait for lunch breaks, she retorted. Bill met her later that afternoon at the Red Lion, his usual calm expression tempered by exasperation. You do realize, he began, that rifling through someone's personal papers counts as illegal entry. Oh, spare me the legal sermon, said Agatha, waving a hand. I was being nosy, not felonious. Same thing in your case. Listen, Bill, she had a ledger with local names and suspicious payments, and she fits the witness description, gloves and pearls. You've seen a few too many Miss Marples, said Bill, though his tone softened. But since you've gone to the trouble of breaking the law, I did have handwriting from that anonymous note analysed. Matches Miss Penrose's entries. Agatha's eyes gleamed. So she did send it. Threatened me to stop snooping. Before you break out the champagne, she has an alibi. She was serving teas during the judging, corroborated by half the committee. That doesn't mean she didn't poison the cordial earlier. True, but there's no proof. Be careful, Agatha. You've rattled her cage. Rubbish, said Agatha, though inwardly she wasn't so sure. Charles, who'd tagged along, leaned back in his chair. You've made yourself wonderfully unpopular again, Aggie. Another triumph. At least I'm getting somewhere, she snapped. Indeed, possibly to court. Agatha gave him a look that could wilt dahlias. That evening, Carsely settled into one of those damp, lonely twilights that made the village seem smaller. Agatha poured herself a generous glass of wine and stared into her living room fire. The lilies from the previous night had been banished to the dustbin, but their scent still lingered faintly, a reminder that danger could smell deceptively elegant. She replayed her conversation with Miss Penrose, the faint tremor in the woman's voice when Mrs. Culpepper's name came up. Guilt? Fear? Or simply exhaustion from Agatha's company? The thought made her snort. If persistence were a crime, I'd be serving life. She turned down the lights, intending to retire early, but as she passed the kitchen bin, something odd caught her eye, a charred scrap of paper, half sticking from the top. She frowned, pulling it free with the tongs. The edges were singed, but she could still make out a few words written in neat, familiar script. Payment received. Cotswold Committee. The handwriting matched the ledger. What on earth? She began, then froze. The back door latch was slightly ajar. She was certain she'd locked it. A faint draught carried the scent of lilies, or perhaps imagination. Heart-pounding, she checked each room, but everything seemed in order. Only the small piece of evidence, half-burned and half-saved, told her someone had been inside her cottage. She sank into a chair, clutching the scrap like a talisman. Someone had risked breaking in just to destroy it, which meant she was closer to the truth than she'd realized, and perhaps closer to danger. Outside, the wind brushed through the hedges, whispering softly, as if the village itself were conspiring. Agatha took a sip of wine, forced a steady breath, and muttered, "Fine, let's play then. But if they think they can scare me with bin fires and botany, they've got another thing coming." Still, when she switched off the lamp and went upstairs, she left the hall light burning, just in case the night had sharper thorns than usual. The next morning arrived with a thin veil of mist lying over Carsely, like a secret no one wanted to admit. Agatha Raisin sat in her kitchen with a second cup of coffee, and the distinct sense that the case was closing in around her. The lilies had been binned, but their ghostly perfume still lingered, much like the feeling that someone had been in her home. Charles, who had turned up uninvited as usual, was sprawled at her table reading the Times. "You know," he said without looking up, "you'd make an excellent scarecrow. Frightens everyone, stands guard all night and complains in the morning." Agatha gave him a look that could have wilted fresh flowers. "If you're trying to be charming, it's not working." "I never try," he said cheerfully. "What's the plan for today, oh mistress of murder?" "Digging into Mrs. Culpepper's past," Agatha replied, setting down her mug with purpose. "There's something we've all missed, a route that goes deeper than the flower show. She chaired the Regional Garden Society once. I'm going to find out who hated her there." "How thrilling," said Charles. "Shall I fetch popcorn or a spade?" "Both," Agatha muttered. The Regional Society kept its records in a converted hall on the outskirts of Evesham, where the air smelled faintly of mildew and bureaucracy. A bored clerk greeted Agatha with the weary politeness of someone who'd already seen 6 retirees and 1 tax inspector that morning. "I'm looking for files on Daphne Culpepper," Agatha announced. "She chaired your committee, didn't she?" "Briefly," the clerk said, opening a filing cabinet. "She resigned, or rather, she was encouraged to, about 5 years ago. Something to do with a member named Dr. Elspeth Merton." "Encouraged," Agatha repeated. Such a lovely euphemism for kicked out. The clerk shrugged. Dr. Merton was accused of falsifying results for a hybrid rose competition. Mrs. Culpepper exposed her. Quite the scandal. Haven't seen Dr. Merton since. Lives alone outside the village now. "Where exactly?" "Near Little Compton, on the old Orchard Road. You can't miss it. Looks like a Gothic cottage that lost its nerve halfway through construction." Agatha smiled. Perfect. By early afternoon, the mist had lifted, replaced by a watery sun that did little for Agatha's mood. Charles insisted on driving, arguing that Agatha's notion of defensive manoeuvring was an offence against road safety. Dr. Elspeth Merton's cottage emerged at the end of a winding lane, half hidden by overgrown ivy. The garden was a tangle of wild roses, their thorns gleaming like small warnings. A hand-painted sign read "Private Property," pollen and people to be kept out. "Subtle," murmured Charles. Agatha marched up the path and rapped firmly on the door. After a moment it opened to reveal a thin woman in a wheelchair, her hair steel grey and her gaze sharp enough to cut stems. "Mrs. Raisin," she said before Agatha could speak. "I thought you'd come." "Have we met?" Agatha asked, startled. "I read the papers. You can't keep your nose out of other people's compost, can you?" Charles stifled a laugh. "I'm investigating Mrs. Culpepper's death," Agatha said briskly. "I understand you had history." Dr. Merton's lips curved faintly. "History implies romance. Ours was more horticultural warfare. She accused me of cheating, said my hybrid roses were unnatural. The irony, of course, is that she later used my research to create her own miracle breeds. She stole my work." "Do you have proof?" "Proof is overrated. I have memory, and that's far more dangerous." Agatha studied her. "You're saying Mrs. Culpepper stole your formula for experimental fertilizers?" "And paraded it as her own," said Merton, her voice low and even. "I warned her what tampering with hybrid toxins could do. She called me melodramatic." "And now she's dead," said Agatha softly. "A coincidence," said Merton, though the word sounded hollow. "You realize that makes you a suspect," said Agatha. "How flattering. But as you can see," she gestured to the wheelchair, "I can't exactly sneak into flower shows undetected, unless your killer's method was rolling me down a hill." Charles, unable to resist, said, "It would make an excellent alibi, though." Merton ignored him. "If you truly want answers, Mrs. Raisin, find out who supplied Daphne with the ingredients for her last batch of fertilizer. Someone sold her something rare, something that didn't belong in an amateur's hands." "And you wouldn't happen to know what that was?" The faintest smile. "A cyanogenic preservative formula I designed for lab trials years ago, never released. If she had it, someone supplied or copied it." Agatha frowned. "Then it's your poison Bill Wong's lab found." "My creation, yes. My crime, no." Back in Carsely, Agatha's kitchen once again became headquarters. Charles opened a bottle of wine, which he claimed was for analytical clarity. "So," he said, leaning on the counter, "Dr. Merton once formulated a cyanide-based preservative. Mrs. Culpepper steals it, and now Mrs. Culpepper's dead. Case closed, surely." "Too simple," said Agatha, pacing. "It's too neat. Besides, Merton couldn't have done it. She's confined to that chair." "Maybe she hired someone," suggested Charles. "A gardener with a grudge and good aim." Agatha stopped pacing. "Jamie Pratt." "Oh, do behave," said Charles. "He's barely old enough to buy a pint." "He's desperate, not stupid. Merton might have promised him money or forgiveness." "Or maybe you're reading too many of your own press clippings," Charles murmured. Agatha ignored him and rang Bill Wong. "Bill, it's me. You'll never guess what I found." "I can probably guess," came Bill's voice calm as ever. "The poison came from a plant developed by Dr. Elspeth Merton. She made it." "I know," said Bill. "We traced a cyanide formulation to Merton's old lab notes. Don't get excited. She's got a rock-solid alibi. The woman hasn't left her house in 2 years. Carer confirms it, neighbours confirm it, CCTV shows nothing. She's practically a hermit." "So, we're back to square one," said Agatha, deflating. "Not quite," said Bill. "There's something else. We recovered a pearl from beneath the orchid table at the scene, probably from a bracelet. Does that ring a bell?" Agatha's mind flashed to Jamie's testimony, the mysterious woman in gloves and pearls. "Oh, it rings," she said, loudly. "Don't do anything rash, Agatha," Bill warned. "Me?" she said sweetly. "Never." Charles, listening, smirked. "You're planning something." "Naturally," said Agatha. "Miss Penrose wears pearls, doesn't she?" "So does half of Gloucestershire." "Yes, but only one of them had reason to visit my cottage and burn evidence," said Agatha. "You're assuming that was her." "I'm assuming nothing," she said. "I'm investigating everything." "Including danger?" "Especially that," said Agatha. As evening settled, Carsely glowed with the kind of fragile calm that only country villages manage before gossip stirs again. Agatha sat by her window, notebook open, tracing the chain of names. Culpeper, Merton, Penrose, Pratt. All tangled, all blooming from the same poisoned root. Her eyes wandered to her garden. Even the new buds seemed hesitant, half open as if uncertain what waited in the air. She sighed, feeling the lonely edge that sometimes followed her victories and defeats alike. "I really must take up something safer," she murmured. "Knitting, perhaps, or exorcism." Then she noticed it, a faint glimmer beneath the porch light. Curious, she stepped outside. Nestled among the damp gravel was a single pearl, small and perfect, gleaming like a dropped secret. Agatha bent down, heart quickening. Whoever had been in her cottage had lost it, and returned. She straightened, scanning the dark lane. Nothing moved, yet the air felt charged, alive with unseen eyes. Its mount marks matched the showground find. "Fine," she muttered. "Keep watching, but pearls can be traced, and so can you." Inside, she locked the door firmly, poured another drink, and scribbled one final note. The woman in pearls was there. Then, with a small grim smile, she added underneath, "And she's still here." Outside, a night breeze rattled the roses, soft, secretive applause for the woman who refused to back down. The Cotswold afternoon glowed deceptively tranquil, the kind of honeyed calm that made outsiders believe life in Carsely was all scones and serenity. She sent the invitations the night before, after Bill confirmed the showground pearl. Agatha Raisin, however, was orchestrating a social ambush. Her cottage had been transformed into a battlefield of porcelain and deception, a teapot steaming like a cannon, sandwiches stacked with military precision, and a woman at the centre of it all whose eyes gleamed with predatory delight. Charles lounged on the sofa, flicking through a gardening magazine upside down. "You're frighteningly calm," he observed. "It's always a bad sign." "I'm not calm," said Agatha, fluffing a cushion that didn't need fluffing. "I'm focused. There's a difference." "Focused on proving what exactly?" "That one of my guests murdered Mrs. Culpeper and probably broke into my house for good measure." "Lovely," said Charles. "Shall I fetch more milk or a priest?" "Neither," said Agatha. "Just keep your mouth shut and your eyes open." "Darling, I always do the reverse." Agatha ignored him, adjusting the lace tablecloth. She had invited everyone under the pretext of a genteel tea: Miss Penrose, the vicar's wife, and the late Mrs. Culpeper's bereaved husband. Bill Wong, ever the diplomat, had agreed to attend as both moral support and unofficial policeman. "They'll all come," said Agatha, glancing at the clock. "Curiosity will drag them if decency doesn't." "And your plan?" Agatha smiled thinly. "To let them hang themselves on their own pearls." By 3:30, the suspects had arrived. The living room buzzed with the awkward politeness of people who shared both grief and gossip. Miss Penrose sat primly on the edge of a chair, her hands folded so tightly they might have been glued. Her pearls caught the light, smaller, less ostentatious than the one Agatha had found, but still notable. Mr. Culpeper, in contrast, looked deflated, his usual pomposity replaced with the helplessness of a man who'd lost both wife and reputation. And Mrs. Fielding, the vicar's wife, fluttered about like a distracted bird, all apologies and delicate gestures. "So sorry for the delay," she murmured, pouring tea with unnecessary flourish. "Traffic from the parish hall, some dreadful confusion with hymn sheets." "Entirely understandable," said Agatha with deceptive warmth. "Murder does tend to disrupt schedules." A small silence followed. Even Charles paused mid-biscuit. Bill cleared his throat. "Mrs. Raisin's just being colourful, of course." "I'm always colourful," said Agatha. "Now milk or lemon, Mrs. Fielding?" "Just milk, thank you," said the vicar's wife, hand trembling faintly. "Pearls go so well with milk, don't you think?" said Agatha casually. The room stilled as if someone had unplugged the air. Miss Penrose's cup rattled against its saucer. Mr. Culpepper coughed violently, and Mrs. Fielding's smile froze mid-politeness. Charles raised an eyebrow behind his teacup. "Oh dear," he murmured. "A veritable pearl reaction." Agatha's gaze lingered on each of them in turn, pretending to fuss over the scones. "Funny thing," she continued. "Pearls keep turning up lately. Found one in my garden, of all places, very distinct. Almost as if someone dropped it after sneaking about where they shouldn't." "A coincidence, surely," said Miss Penrose too quickly. "Perhaps," said Agatha, "or perhaps a sign of guilt." Mr. Culpepper slammed his cup down, splashing tea across the lace cloth. "This is absurd. You can't accuse people over jewellery. Daphne had pearls. Every woman in this blasted village has pearls." "Not everyone," said Agatha softly. "Mrs. Culpepper's were real. Some aren't so fortunate." "Meaning?" snapped Miss Penrose. "Meaning imitation never lasts under pressure," Agatha said, smiling sweetly. Bill looked up from his notebook, suppressing a sigh. "Perhaps we could keep the conversation civil, Mrs. Raisin?" "Oh, I'm perfectly civil," said Agatha. "I just like honesty with my tea." Charles, sensing tension at its most delicious, leaned forward. "Do tell us, Aggie, what pearls have to do with murder? Or are we simply comparing accessories?" Agatha gave him a warning glare. "They were found beneath the orchid table, at the scene. Someone lost them during Mrs. Culpepper's collapse." The effect was immediate. Miss Penrose turned white as icing sugar. Mr. Culpepper's mouth tightened, and Mrs. Fielding, ever serene, reached for her teacup as if to anchor herself. Agatha watched, fascinated. "You look flushed, Mrs. Fielding. Too warm?" "It's the fire," the vicar's wife murmured. "One does get overheated." "Funny," said Agatha, "for a woman who spends her life in chilly churches." Bill shifted uncomfortably. "Agatha." But Agatha had risen, moving gracefully, for her, toward the tray of teacups. "You know," she said, "Mrs. Culpepper always claimed she could spot deceit faster than mildew. She must have seen something that day at the show, something scandalous enough to silence her." "You're implying she was blackmailing someone," said Charles. "I'm implying nothing," said Agatha. "I'm proving it." She set her cup down and deliberately let it slip. It shattered on the floor with a sharp, satisfying crack. Everyone jumped. Mrs. Fielding gasped and stooped instinctively, reaching out, and that's when Agatha saw it, a bracelet glinting beneath the cuff of her cardigan, a perfect string of creamy pearls, the same size and colour as the one found under the orchid table. Agatha crouched beside her, feigning clumsiness. "Oh dear, I've gone and made a mess. How terribly careless of me." "Not at all," said Mrs. Fielding, quickly flustered. "Accidents happen." "So they do," said Agatha softly. When the guests had gone, some in offended silence, others in confusion, Agatha, Charles and Bill remained. Charles stretched like a cat. "Well, that was positively Shakespearean. Tears, tremors and crockery." Bill rubbed his temples. "Agatha, you can't provoke suspects in your living room. There are procedures." "Procedures don't solve murders," said Agatha. "Instinct does." "Your instinct is chaos," Bill said mildly. "It's effective chaos," she retorted. Charles laughed. "You've definitely rattled the vicar's wife. Did you see her hand shake when you mentioned the pearls?" "And that bracelet," said Agatha. "I'd bet my next manicure one pearl is missing." "You're thinking she killed Daphne Culpepper?" Bill asked. "It fits. She was serving tea during judging, the perfect chance to slip something into the cup. And Daphne threatened to expose an affair she was having with that committee man from Morton-in-Marsh. Mrs. Fielding's moral reputation couldn't survive it." Bill nodded slowly. "The motive's strong, but we still need proof." "We'll get it," said Agatha. "Tomorrow, at the Marquee. A little reenactment of events. Let's see how she performs when the stage is hers." "You're mad," said Charles. "Inspired," corrected Agatha. "Besides, nothing reveals guilt faster than guilt itself." "And what's my role in this melodrama?" Charles asked. "Your usual, to look decorative and pour tea." "Finally, a challenge suited to my talents." Later that evening, Agatha sat by the fire, alone. The scent of broken china and overbrewed tea lingered in the air. She was proud of herself, and uneasy. Mrs. Fielding's reaction had been unmistakable, yet something about it nagged at her. There had been genuine fear in the woman's eyes, not just of exposure, but of something else. Agatha poured herself a small whiskey and stared into the flames. Solving murders, she thought, was easier than facing her own loneliness. Charles would drift home to his manor, Bill to his tidy moral certainty, and she would be left in her silent cottage, her only company, the ticking clock, and her own restless mind. Still, she told herself, better restless than irrelevant. The clock struck 9. Agatha rose, stretching stiffly, and looked toward her window. Outside, the village slept under a hazy moon. Somewhere, she imagined, Mrs. Fielding lay awake too, rehearsing her lies for tomorrow. "You can pray all you like, my dear," Agatha murmured, "but prayers won't save you when the truth's in bloom." Her lips curved into a smile, sharp as a thorn. She doused the fire, turned off the lamp, and left the last cup unwashed, a deliberate imperfection like herself. Tomorrow, she would walk into that marquee not just as an amateur sleuth, but as a woman certain she had cornered her quarry. And if she was wrong, well, Agatha Raisin had never let being wrong stop her before. The morning of the reenactment dawned with deceptive prettiness. The morning after the tea, a soft haze over the fields, the scent of wet grass rising like memory. Agatha Raisin stood before her dressing mirror, applying lipstick with the intensity of a general painting war stripes. Charles Fraith lounged in her doorway, immaculate as ever and irritatingly amused. "You're taking this terribly seriously," he said. "It's a village reenactment, not Hamlet." "Murder is never amateur theatre," Agatha replied. "I've arranged every detail. The exact setup, the same tea table, even the cursed orchids. It's going to jog her conscience." "Or her solicitor," murmured Charles. "Bill's bringing back up," Agatha said, snapping her compact shut. "If Mrs. Fielding so much as flinches, I'll see it." "You do enjoy a public hanging," he teased. "Nonsense. I prefer private justice. It's more efficient." "And less legal," he said, smiling. Agatha ignored him and reached for her handbag. Beneath her vanity, a flicker of nerves stirred. This time she wasn't chasing shadows. She was setting a trap for a woman who had killed, whether by malice or accident. And, as usual, she couldn't decide whether she felt brave or foolish. The Carsely marquee had been restored after the chaos of the flower show, bunting freshly strung, tables rearranged, air thick with the smell of earth and disinfectant. Agatha surveyed it like a queen inspecting a battlefield. "Perfect," she said briskly. "Every petal in place. Even the vicar's wife won't resist attending a community event for closure." Bill Wong, already looking weary, checked his notebook. "You realize this is highly irregular. Technically, it's entrapment." "Technically," said Agatha. "So is half of Scotland Yard's success." Charles chuckled. "Do relax, Bill. Think of it as a tea party with moral consequences." "You both make me nervous," Bill muttered. Agatha smiled. "Good. Then we're all alert." At 11 sharp, the guests began to arrive. Miss Penrose appeared first, clutching a potted fern like a shield. Then came Mr. Culpepper, his grief curdled into resentment. Finally, Mrs. Fielding entered, dressed impeccably in pale lilac, her pearls gleaming at her throat. "Mrs. Raisin," she said, her smile too bright. "Such a thoughtful idea, to honour poor Daphne's memory like this." "Yes," said Agatha, her tone sweet as icing. "I thought we might revisit the scene. Sometimes reliving the moment helps us understand what really happened." "Quite," said Mrs. Fielding, though her eyes flickered briefly toward the tea table. Agatha guided everyone to their places with a hostess's efficiency. The vicar's wife took her seat behind the teapot, just as she had on the fatal day. The same cups, the same cordial bottle, though this one, of course, contained nothing more sinister than diluted squash. "Now," Agatha announced, "let's imagine the judges are about to inspect Mrs. Culpepper's orchids. Everyone's in position. Mrs. Fielding, you were pouring tea, yes?" "Indeed," said Mrs. Fielding, lifting the pot with practised grace, and Mrs. Culpepper asked for cordial instead. "You fetched it from that table?" "Yes," said the vicar's wife. "She said she needed refreshment." "How considerate," Agatha murmured, "considering you'd been quarrelling earlier that week." A faint line appeared between Mrs. Fielding's brows. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, come now," Agatha said lightly. "Half the village heard. She threatened to reveal your little indiscretion with Mr. Hatherley, the committee member from Morton-in-Marsh." A ripple ran through the group. Charles leaned forward, visibly entertained. Mrs. Fielding's composure cracked for a fraction of a second, then reassembled. "Gossip is an ugly thing, Mrs. Raisin. I should think you'd know that." "I do," said Agatha. "But gossip often starts with truth. Tell me, did you mean to kill her, or just silence her?" Bill shot Agatha a warning glance, but she pressed on. "Because it wasn't just poison, was it? It was humiliation. You wanted to ruin her precious exhibit, a petty act of revenge that turned fatal." "That's outrageous," Mrs. Fielding snapped, her voice trembling. "You can't." "Can't what?" said Agatha. "Accuse you publicly." "You're right. It's rude, but so is murder." Mrs. Fielding rose abruptly, face pale, pearls trembling at her throat. "You've no proof?" Agatha gestured toward the cordial bottle. "You fetched that from your husband's shed, didn't you? The same shed where he keeps his gardening supplies, including Dr. Merton's experimental toxin. You thought you'd teach Daphne a lesson, switch her cordial with something harmless-looking, only you didn't realize what was in it." "Stop it," whispered Mrs. Fielding, voice cracking. "You poured it," Agatha continued softly. "You watched her drink, you saw her collapse, and you did nothing." "I didn't know!" Mrs. Fielding cried suddenly, the words bursting out like confession in church. "I swear I didn't know. It was supposed to be harmless, just a warning. She laughed at me, said she'd tell everyone. I only meant to spoil her precious flowers, not her." Silence fell. Outside, a bird called, mockingly cheerful. Bill stepped forward gently. "Mrs. Fielding, please sit down." She sank onto the chair, trembling. "It was her fault," she whispered. "She provoked me. Always judging, always prying. She made me feel small. I just wanted her to stop." Agatha, for once, said nothing. The triumph she'd expected tasted bitter now. Guilt and pity tangled like weeds. Mrs. Fielding looked up, eyes wet. "When she fell, I thought she was pretending. Then I saw her face. I wanted to scream, but everyone was watching, so I smiled, poured another cup. I couldn't let them see." Bill nodded grimly to his constable, who approached with quiet efficiency. "We'll take it from here, Mrs. Fielding." She didn't resist. As they led her away, she turned once toward Agatha. "You must be proud of yourself," she said softly. "You've exposed another sinner. Does it make you feel better?" Agatha's throat tightened. "It makes the village safer," she said, though it sounded weak even to her own ears. "Safer," the woman repeated faintly. "You mean quieter?" Then she was gone. For a while no one spoke. The Marquis seemed to sag under the weight of everything unspoken. Charles was the first to move, fetching Agatha's handbag. "Well," he said lightly, "that was dramatic, even for you." Agatha managed a thin smile. "I didn't expect her to break so fast." "You seldom do," said Bill gently. "You're good at forcing truth, Agatha, but truth isn't always satisfying." "You think I enjoy it?" "You enjoy the chase," said Bill, "not the ending." He left soon after, paperwork and pity following him out into the sunlight. Charles lingered, of course. He never missed a post-mortem of the emotional kind. "You look like someone's cancelled Christmas," he said. Agatha sighed, staring at the wilted dahlias on the display table. "It's just, she wasn't evil. Foolish, proud, desperate maybe, but not evil. None of them ever are." "That's what makes them interesting," said Charles, pouring her a glass of champagne from the bottle he'd smuggled in his jacket. "You brought champagne to a confession?" she asked, incredulous. "Naturally. One must be prepared for either celebration or consolation." Agatha took the glass despite herself. "You're impossible." "Yes," he agreed, "but charmingly so." They sat in silence, watching the constables pack up evidence. The air smelled faintly of crushed petals, sweetness with decay underneath. "You know," Charles said after a moment, "you really are the deadliest bloom in Carsely." Agatha snorted. "That's a dreadful line." "It's true, though. You root out rot wherever it hides." "Perhaps," she said, "but I can't seem to grow anything decent myself." Charles's expression softened. "You'll manage. You always do." "With or without you, I suppose." "Preferably with. My schedule's terribly empty without your crises." She smiled faintly. "You'd miss me." "Desperately," he said, in a terribly British, emotionally repressed way. Agatha laughed then, a real laugh, dry and unsteady. "Oh, go on. Pour yourself one too." "Gladly." They clinked glasses, and for a moment the Marquis felt almost warm again. That night, Carsely lay quiet under drizzle and lamplight. Agatha returned to her cottage exhausted but restless, the silence pressing too close. The day's victory, if it could be called that, had left her hollow. She'd solved a murder, yes, but exposed a life of quiet misery in the process. She fed the cat, set down her shoes, and poured herself a final whiskey. The fire crackled softly, offering comfort she refused to name. Then she noticed it, an envelope on the doormat, cream paper, no stamp. Her name written in neat, unfamiliar script. Agatha frowned, tore it open, and unfolded a single card. "Your roses deserved first prize after all." No signature, just the faintest trace of perfume, something floral, expensive, and faintly mocking. Agatha stared at it for a long time, the whiskey glass cooling in her hand. Then she smiled, half wary, half amused. "Well," she murmured, "someone's still watching." She set the card on the mantel beside a single fresh rose she'd cut from her revived garden that morning. Its petals glowed faintly in the lamplight, fragile, beautiful, temporary. "Here's to you, Mrs. Culpepper," she said softly. "May you haunt someone else for a change." Outside, the rain deepened into a steady, soothing rhythm. Agatha leaned back, the day's tension finally slipping away, and allowed herself one last indulgent thought, that perhaps she wasn't quite done with mysteries, or with life's thorns, just yet. The morning after the confession began with sunlight so innocent it felt almost rude. The rain that had haunted Carsely for days had vanished, leaving the village glistening, scrubbed clean of scandal, or so it pretended. The hedgerows sparkled with dew, the air smelled faintly of grass and gossip. Agatha Raisin stood in her garden, teacup in hand, inspecting the new rosebush she had impulsively purchased the previous afternoon. An act of defiance, she told herself. The petals, blushing pink, unfurled with the smug confidence of youth. She envied them. "You're smiling at a plant," said a familiar voice behind her. Charles Fraith leaned against the gate, perfectly groomed and insufferably relaxed, a newspaper tucked under his arm. "I was thinking," said Agatha, taking another sip. "A dangerous pastime." He held out the paper. "You've made the Evesham Chronicle." She snatched it. The headline read, "Sleuth of the Show Solves Blooming Murder." "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, though her mouth betrayed a smirk. "Blooming murder. That's dreadful." "They're journalists, darling, not poets." Agatha's eyes scanned the article. It described her as the formidable amateur detective who sniffed out a killer faster than the orchids wilted. She had been called worse. "Formidable," she repeated with satisfaction. "I rather like that." Charles smiled. "Of course you do, but don't get too comfortable. Fame fades faster than cut flowers." "You're just jealous," she said, folding the paper. "People love a woman of substance." "Substance, yes. Subtlety, no." Agatha ignored him and set the cup on the wall. "I deserve a little recognition after everything. I did solve the case." "And nearly gave Bill Wong an ulcer doing it," came another voice. Bill had arrived, sleeves rolled up, carrying the expression of a man who'd been roped into morning tea against his will. "Good morning, Mrs. Raisin," he said dryly. "I see you're basking in notoriety." "Not basking, appreciating," she said. "You'd think the police might send a thank-you note." "We prefer not to encourage you," Bill replied. "You're already one headline away from starting a private agency." "I rather like that idea," said Charles. "Raisin Investigations, discretion, drama, and daffodils." "Don't mock," said Agatha. "I could do it." "You do it," said Bill. "Illegally, mostly." Agatha huffed and poured him tea. "Ungrateful men, I bring justice to your doorstep, and you bring sarcasm." "We bring balance," said Charles. "You bring clutter," she snapped. Mrs. Bloxby appeared at the garden gate then, her calm presence softening the morning like sunlight through lace. She carried a basket of scones wrapped in a tea towel. "I thought you might enjoy these," she said warmly, "and perhaps a word of congratulations." "Thank you," said Agatha, accepting both. "At least someone appreciates me." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "Everyone appreciates you, my dear, though they may not always admit it aloud." Charles raised his cup. "Hear, hear." "Still," Mrs. Bloxby continued gently, "you mustn't let pride take root. It grows quickly and strangles the flowers around it." Agatha rolled her eyes. You sound like my conscience, and I keep that locked in the cupboard." "Then perhaps open the door occasionally," said Mrs. Bloxby with mild amusement. Bill hid a grin behind his teacup. Before Agatha could retort, a bright voice carried over the hedge. "Aggie, darling, I've had the most brilliant idea." Roy Silver bounded through the gate in a cloud of cologne and enthusiasm, wearing sunglasses large enough to serve drinks on. "Oh, Lord," said Agatha, "it's too early for brilliance." "Nonsense. I've been up since 8. Pure inspiration. Listen, we market your garden as the scene of Carsely's most stylish murder. Imagine the tours, the interviews, the merchandise." Bill groaned audibly. "Good grief." "We could do tea towels," Roy pressed on, "with roses embroidered. Red for passion, white for innocence, maybe a little splash of blood for drama." "Roy," said Agatha sharply, "this was a murder, not a musical." "Details, darling. The public adores drama. You'd be the Cotswold's answer to Miss Marple, only with better hair." "And worse judgment," muttered Bill. Charles leaned back, amused. "I rather like the idea of a publicity shoot. Agatha among the roses, tragic yet triumphant." "You'd like anything with a camera and a woman," said Bill. "True," Charles admitted, "but especially this woman." Agatha flushed, half pleased, half irritated. "You're all impossible. I'm not turning my garden into a crime scene attraction." "Yet," Roy said with a wink. "You'll change your mind when the tourists start begging for selfies." "Tourists?" she spluttered. "In my garden? Absolutely not." "Just imagine it," Roy persisted. "You in your trench coat, holding a magnifying glass." "Out," said Agatha. Roy sighed dramatically. "Philistines, all of you. I'm simply trying to honour your legacy." "My legacy is alive, thank you very much." "For now," Bill murmured. Mrs. Bloxby, ever the peacekeeper, handed Roy a scone. "Why not have some breakfast before you start planning monuments?" Roy brightened immediately. "Carbs, my creative fuel." Agatha watched them, her mismatched circle of friends, and felt the faintest pang of affection beneath the annoyance. For all their teasing, she knew they'd stood by her through the chaos, the danger, and her own worst temper. Still, she wasn't about to say it aloud. "You know," she said briskly, "I think the village should thank me properly. Perhaps a luncheon." "You mean a luncheon you organise, host and dominate?" said Charles. "Precisely." Bill stood. "If you do, warn me so I can be on shift somewhere far away." Roy laughed. "Oh, come on, Bill, she's harmless." "So are bees," Bill said, "until you prod the hive." Mrs. Bloxby rose too, gathering her basket. "I must be off. The church committee meets at noon, and after this week I'm braced for carnage." "More flowers to judge?" asked Charles. "Worse," she said serenely. "Table arrangements." When she left, silence returned to the garden, peaceful if only for a moment. Agatha looked around. Her roses, once bedraggled, were beginning to recover. The soil, turned and fed, showed signs of new life. Even the cat seemed calmer. Charles followed her gaze. "You've done well, Aggie." "Thank you," she said softly, surprised by her own contentment. "It's rather poetic," he added. "Death among the dahlias, life among the roses." "Don't you start," she said, though not unkindly. "So what now?" he asked. Agatha considered. "Now I water the garden, feed the cat, and plan my next triumph. Perhaps something without corpses." "Boring?" said Charles. "Peaceful," said Agatha. He smiled. "Same thing for most people, not for you." She ignored him and knelt to prune a stray leaf. The sun warmed her shoulders, the air smelled faintly of promise. As she worked, she noticed a single rosebud trembling in the breeze, its petals ready to unfurl. She smiled at it, proud and a little wistful. "Next year," she murmured, "I'm winning fair and square." Charles raised his glass of leftover champagne. He had naturally brought a bottle. "To next year, then. May the best woman cheat gracefully." Agatha laughed, shaking her head. "You're incorrigible. And you're formidable," he said, "our local sleuth of the show." "Don't remind me," she said, but her smile lingered. The laughter faded into the hum of bees, the whisper of wind through hedges. Carsely was calm again, at least for now. And as the first rays of afternoon caught on the opening rose, its petals glittering with dew, Agatha thought, not for the first time, that beauty was fleeting, pride inevitable, and life deliciously unpredictable. She stood, brushed soil from her knees, and looked out across her garden, her little kingdom of thorns and triumphs. For the moment it was enough.